So I wanted to try something different with this video. I hope you'll indulge me. I will be employing a super scientific strategy for determining how to handle Final Fantasy as an IP. This is just another way of saying, get ready for a video full of my opinions. Please be aware of this moving forward, as some of my suggestions in this video will undoubtedly seem very odd to some of you. But without further ado, I present my proposed steps as part of this guide. Step 1. Remember who and what you are at all cost. As I'm sure many gaming fans are aware, a lot of publishers and developers tend to refocus their efforts at attracting newer customers. This is an undeniable truth of marketing and growing your brand. Video games are one of the most fluctuating markets to try this with. The reason being the mean age group disparity from each gaming generation to the next is constantly different in terms of trends and industry factors like technology. So, what is used as a selling point now could be a complete 180 in 5 to 7 years. Game development can sometimes take exactly that long, as we've seen in the industry recently. So, I completely understand why companies feel a lot of added pressure to chase trends. However, in a gaming landscape where development time is getting longer and trends change far sooner, why would you try to copy a formula or popular idea which could be irrelevant by the time the game comes out? Final Fantasy hasn't exactly become a trend chaser, but they have tried to middling success to incorporate a lot of the more modern game design aspects into their franchise. Final Fantasy XV tried to be an open world experience, but the way the game was built around it made the open world feel like more of a hindrance. This was with both the story as well as the level design. In essence, it was neither a benefit or a compliment. It was just sort of there. Let's take a look back for a moment. Final Fantasy XIII is a wildly divisive entry in the franchise. Some people swear by the game and love it, while others haven't touched a Final Fantasy title since then. One thing that Final Fantasy XIII did do was to keep the series' turn-based combat heritage. Turn-based combat isn't as mainstream as it once was, but plenty of franchises still utilize it. Persona is a prime example of this. Still, one of the main complaints I see from multiple groups of fans surrounding Final Fantasy is a lack of turn-based combat in newer titles. I totally get why Square Enix is hesitant to return to turn-based combat. Now, I'm not of the opinion that turn-based is outdated or anything. I think it's still viable and enjoyable, but I acknowledge there is an adjustment to getting used to the pacing of games like that. It's not for everyone, especially when coming from a lot of the other more popular design styles we see in the industry. Regardless of this, a turn-based system is a crucial pillar in Final Fantasy's history. It's part of the DNA of the franchise. Leaving it behind completely is like leaving a piece of Final Fantasy's soul in a void of chaos. Square Enix doesn't have to stop innovating, but they have to acknowledge a long-running complaint if they are ever to win over long-time, albeit dissatisfied fans that are beginning to feel disenfranchised from the IP. Step 2. It's a big world out there and a lot of gamers are in it. While addressing the concerns of longtime fans is crucial for maintaining a historic fanbase, Final Fantasy must still find new ways to attract new gamers and even younger fans. There are a lot of ways to go about doing this. Square Enix isn't oblivious to trying new things, as evidenced by some of the more niche titles they put out. My concern is that they are limiting the scope of Final Fantasy's expansion. Think of all the possibilities if you really want to be creative with the IP. Design mainline titles to cater to longtime fans, while partnering with other studios worldwide to develop spin-off titles that allow Square to test the waters for what could work or even be a sleeper hit. Use games like Final Fantasy X as a baseline for how to construct current or future mainline titles, allowing for a modern rendition of classic control schemes and turn-based combat. Next, Square Enix could explore wildly different variations of Final Fantasy partnerships. Examples of potential growth partnerships and game ideas include, but are not limited to, the following list. This starts with Square thinking outside the box and enlisting a company like Traveler's Tales to potentially make a LEGO Final Fantasy game, retelling the events of the first 4 to 5 Final Fantasy titles in LEGO format. This would effectively allow for those adventures to be remade for younger audiences and combine LEGO's signature whimsical humor with a simplified version of Final Fantasy's epic stories. Doing this would help engage a younger generation of gamers with the IP that might otherwise never be exposed to it. True, many complicated nuances would have to be streamlined, but since the LEGO games are designed with kids in mind, I'm not sure this would really be a problem. After all, these aren't replacing the original games. At the same time, young audiences wouldn't be forced to seek out a game from decades ago and learn mountains of lore built up over generations of fandom. This would be a fun, easy onboarding maneuver to introduce the concepts and overall Final Fantasy IP to a new audience. I don't know, it's just a thought. Additionally, I think Final Fantasy should have spin-off titles which tackle different genre categories to court other players without sacrificing the core Final Fantasy experience from the mainline numbered titles. Game ideas could be pretty much anything, like a gothic horror themed Final Fantasy. That would be awesome, incorporating European gothic archetypes and folklore into the world design and even a unique take on summons. Personally, I would love seeing something really bold and daring that just comes completely out of left field. Something that could act as like a narrative focused, albeit experimental third-person shooter, incorporating unique use of summons, magic, and maybe even like a steampunk setting. Maybe they could partner up with a studio like Respawn to make something like this. Again, these don't have to be the ideas which Square experiments with, but I use these examples to paint a picture of how you could try to reach other gamers who wouldn't normally try out anything Final Fantasy related. Remember, this is not about replacing the core legacy Final Fantasy games. It's about preserving them, but utilizing that spin-off game structure to explore a vast variety of opportunities that wouldn't work with the main games. I'm just spitballing here, but I wouldn't mind trying out a Final Fantasy platformer with like a Moogle as some sort of sidekick character. Square is sitting on a mythologically enhanced narrative powerhouse, and design-wise, one of the most malleable IPs in gaming. Why not field pitches for different ideas from studios for smaller, less expensive spin-offs? These games could help the franchise cover the gap in between the numbered Final Fantasy games. Not to mention, this would consistently expose the Final Fantasy brand to new audiences without having to sacrifice what longtime fans love about the mainline titles. I think you all can understand the point I'm making with this. Square has spent the better part of a decade trying to have their cake and eat it too. They want to make Final Fantasy appeal to everyone all at once. While that's not something which has ever truly worked for game franchises like Final Fantasy, if you make every game trying to cater to as many people as possible, you'll consistently come up short and satisfy even fewer with mixed reception. The issue is that by focusing on vast industry appeal and modernizing classic features fans actually like, Square has made games that become increasingly more divisive for one reason or another. I'd like to take a brief moment and point out that despite the divisiveness of the newer games, I actually feel the quality of these more recent titles is still really good. I love a lot of what they've done. Final Fantasy VII Remake and Final Fantasy XVI are still really fun, enjoyable games. Narratively, Final Fantasy can be anything, but I do feel like the core fandom has largely favored the classical approach from the older games and the combat design from those games over the newer choices made for recent titles. Thus, it would be perhaps in the best interest of Square to tailor their design decisions to align more closely with what has proven timeless and beloved for them in the past. As I stated previously, this would allow them to please the core fandom while attempting smaller, more experimental concepts. Maybe I'm alone in thinking this is a good idea, but it really feels like a win-win, no-brainer situation. Step 3. Don't be short-sighted with your premier gaming IP. Square should not be limiting themselves with exclusivity or, heck, even timed exclusivity deals. Grow the brand and nurture your fan base in as many places as possible to set up a healthy, revolving fandom that feels interconnected, not estranged. This isn't a catch-all fix, but certainly as mentioned in my last video, this practice has caused some harm to the IP, as it limits potential growth or exposure since you're releasing it to a confined audience. It's difficult to pinpoint a very few specific factors to extrapolate what works for games as complex as Final Fantasy. Each one is so different from the last in many different ways. That said, you would think after making as many games as Square has over the years, they would have a pretty good idea of what makes Final Fantasy special to its fans. Maybe they do know, but they aren't exactly sure how to translate that in a game designed for the modern gaming industry. This video isn't me saying the franchise is doomed if it doesn't do exactly X, Y, or Z thing, but let's not fool ourselves into thinking Square has made only wise and beneficial decisions in managing the Final Fantasy IP over the last decade. Well, anyway, that's this fan's abridged 2 cents for fixing some of the franchise valleys we've seen with Final Fantasy in recent memory. I don't dislike modern Final Fantasy games, however I can't help feeling, based on the lacking qualities from the last decade, there could have been more done. With that, we've come to the end of the video, so why don't you all let me know what you think should be done to mix things up with Final Fantasy in the comment section down below. Thanks again for watching all the way to the end, I really appreciate it. If you liked the video, please consider subscribing, clicking the like button, and hitting that little bell for notifications so you don't miss out on any new videos as soon as they drop. Thanks again, and have yourself a great day.